Welcome back to Bookmas. Today we're going to be talking about all of the books that I read in November. We do need to still wrap up the month of November, even though I am full swing into the Christmas spirit and fully in December mode. We do have to remember what I read in November. I did read some pretty solid books in the month of November. I had my collaboration with Cassidy, which was so much fun. I will leave it up here in case you guys haven't checked that out yet. She picked some really good books for me in that video. I also read some of my Goodreads Choice Awards, which you guys should have also seen before this video went live as well. So it was a very mixed bag in the month of November, which is pretty typical for me. I managed to read 14 books, over 6,000 pages. I listened to over 35 hours of audiobook. My average rating was not great. I had an average rating of a 2.9 this month, which I really wish was higher. But like I said, it was a mixed bag and that's okay. I still had a lot of fun with all of my videos this month. I started 4 series, but I DNF'd at least 2 or 3 of those. I'll have to go back and look. So it doesn't feel as bad. It's not as bad. It's not as bad. And I read a couple of diverse books as well, which I'm trying to make a bigger priority moving forward. Most of my books this month were audiobooks. I had a couple of ebooks that I read, a couple that I read dual versions of, but I had so much going on that I had to multitask somehow. Most of the books were books that I've read from before, but I did have a couple of new to me and a couple of debut as well. And then my most genre as usual was romantasy, but I read a couple of fantasy, a couple of horror, and a thriller and a romance this month. So I went a little bit out of my normal. So let's just kick it off and talk about all of the books that I read. The first one was A Duel with a Vampire Lord by Elise Kova. This one was so much fun. I love Elise Kova's writing style. It's so easy to sink into. She writes some great characters. This one's about the daughter of the blacksmith, and in their culture, the blacksmith are always women, and in order to keep their tribe strengthened, they have to have a match and marry off pretty early. And so she's known this was her duty for forever, but she knows it's going to be a loveless match. It's not really something that she wants. They're actually making swords that are strong enough to be swords, but are made of, I forget which alloy they're made out of. Is it steel? I can't remember. I should remember that. But basically able to kill vampires. And so that's what makes her so important in the community. They also have like this head of the vampire hunters, and every 500 years, the vampire lord comes out, and if they can manage to kill him, they can wipe out all of the mindless vampires under him. Her brother goes out and gets caught by the vampire lord, and in order to save him, she steps in. She's like, please let my brother go. She ends up getting taken by the vampire lord and realizes that things are not always as she thought they were, and ends up being a part of the world of the vampires for a little while. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was so much fun. It had some really great banter. It also had some really good found family aspects to it as well. A good plot. I would highly recommend it. If you like Elise Kova's writing, you want something that is easy to sink into. My only complaint was that it was a touch too long. I felt like it did lull in some spots, and I wanted things to speed up just a little bit faster. But overall, that is a very small complaint, and I'll absolutely be reading more in the Married to Magic series in the future. So I gave this one a 4-star. And then we moved on to the Scarlet Veil by Shelby Mahurin. This is one that I did not think I was gonna like. I was looking for vampire books for my vampire vlog, and I was running low on books that I was enjoying and I wanted to read. So I decided to pick this one up and was very surprised by it as well. I ended up giving it a lower 4-star. It is set in the world after Serpent and Dove, and if you don't want Serpent and Dove to be spoiled, I do think you have to read that one before reading the series. It also talks about a lot of things that happened in that while you don't necessarily have to read to understand the Scarlet Veil, it really helps with character development. I think if I would have known that, I would have felt a stronger connection to our main character, whereas we kept referencing these things happening, but I didn't see it, so it didn't have the emotional impact on me. It did, however, make me want to go back and read the Serpent and Dove series because I thought that the concept of that and what they were talking about was so interesting. So I do think I'll actually be going back and reading that now, but I liked this book as well. We're following one of the characters from the Serpent and Dove series, and she has decided to become one of the huntresses, but her fiance doesn't want her to get hurt. He doesn't really want her to train, and so she decides that once people start dying, she's gonna take it upon herself to investigate, and gets taken to the Isle of Monsters by a vampire. I thought that this had some pretty good banter. Again, some really good found family vibes. It is young adult, but I wanted there to be a little bit more of the relationship side of things because when it was there, it was so much fun, but I felt like, is it Mikau that was the main guy, which wasn't in it enough for me, and I wanted more from him, but I think that we'll definitely get that in the second book. It is just a duology, and the second book comes out next year, and I'm very, very excited for it. Then a reread for me because we are reading through the entire series with my Patreon up until the final book comes out, and that is The Mime Order by Samantha Shannon. I ended up giving this reread a 3.5 star. I felt very similarly to this as I did the first time time I read it. The Bone Season is following Paige Mahoney in a world where there are clairvoyants, but the clairvoyants are feared and they're hunted. You are not allowed to be a clairvoyant citizen, and if you are caught, then you are killed. She does get caught and gets taken to a place called the Bone Season and learns a lot more about the world, and it's kind of like a containment camp and how to strengthen her gift, and she never really realized why clairvoyance existed. I think that the Bone Season is a little bit slow, but the mime order is also slow in a different way. It expands the world and the politics in a lot of ways that the Bone Season missed, and it's set in more of London versus the more isolated setting. So I think if that was the reasons you didn't like the Bone Season, you felt like it was too isolated and there wasn't enough of the politics in the world, that you will enjoy this one a lot better. There were just parts of it that moved too slowly for me. I can appreciate everything that this book was doing, the character development, the introduction of new characters and kind of fleshing all of them out, the interpersonal relationships and where Paige started versus where she needed to be was impeccably done, but I wish that the plot had moved just a touch faster for me. So that's why I ended up getting a 3.5, but I am so excited to move on to The Song Rising, and The Mask Falling, if it still gets the rating that it did when I first read it, is one of my favorite books. Next up we have Vows and Ruins, which is the second book in the Blood and Steel series, and I had so much fun with this. I was sad because I loved Slaying the Shadow Prince, but when I read Blood and Steel, I was just a touch disappointed. I think in the moment I didn't want something that read younger, and I also wanted it to be Slaying the Shadow Prince. I wanted those feelings back, and that's just not what Thea was, and that's okay. But in the moment, that's not what I wanted from this story. It's following Althea, and she is a girl in a world where women are not allowed to carry swords. There was a prophecy that the Daughter of Darkness would wield a sword and wipe out all of Thesmar, so they just outlawed it for everybody. But all she's ever wanted is to become a warrior of Thesmar. When the warriors of Thesmar show up in her village, she sees it as an opportunity to get something that she's always wanted, and we have like a mentor-mentee aspect going on. We have Wilder, who is the youngest and one of the most powerful warriors of Thesmar, and they end up having a reluctant relationship. The banter in this one is so good. He's so grumpy, but we do get a lot more of Wilder in this book than we did in the first one. I thought that the way that it ended and the way that the world and the plot is expanding, I really enjoyed. It was a little too hot and heavy for me in places, which is why it got a 4-star. I felt like sometimes the relationship could have been a little bit too sappy as we went on, but we do love a man that is obsessed. However, I do think that the spicy scenes were just a bit too many in here for me, so I'm hoping that we get back to the badassery that is Thea and Wilder in the third book in the series. Based off of the way this ended, I definitely think we're going to. It ends on a massive cliffhanger, and I'm dying to figure out what's going to happen next. Then we had one of my most anticipated releases, if not my most anticipated release of 2024, and that was Songbird and the Heart of Stone by Carissa Broadbent. And I am sad to report that this ended up getting a 3.5 star from me. I was beyond excited after Serpent and the Wings of Night being one of my favorite duologies to ever exist, but I was disappointed in Songbird. I felt like Misha just is too soft of a character, and I honestly think I could have gotten over that a little bit, but she felt very different than the first series. She lost some of her reckless humor, that kind of masking her feelings with humor and with sarcasm that I felt like we got from the first book. And then on top of all of that, because it was so introspective, it felt like she was just laminating constantly on this sun god and kind of, well, she's not what she wanted to be. She's not got the powers that she always wanted. And then we had Acer, who is supposed to be her love interest, but the chemistry just wasn't there. They didn't interact hardly at all until the second half of the book. So it was just a little tougher for me to get behind it. Songbird, I did not mention, is actually the third book in the Serpent and the Wings of Night series, but it is the first book in Misha's duology. So it's 3 duologies set all in the same world, and they kind of have this overarching plot thread. So even though you could read this book without having read the first 2, you probably shouldn't. And it's following Misha, who is a vampire that used to be the priestess of the sun god, and obviously because vampires are night creatures, she was kind of tossed aside by the sun god when she is captured for reasons that I will leave out of this in case you haven't read Serpent and the Wings of Night, and taken by Acer into the underworld to complete a mission for Nyaxia, who is the goddess of the vampires. And I just wish that there had been a little bit more, I think, to this story overall. I needed more banter, more chemistry, more something. The characters just felt too flat and too introspective for me, so I was bored for most of it. I will say though that the ending was great. The last like 30% of that book made me consider bumping it up to a 4-star, and we're getting to see a character that we thought we weren't going to get to see again come back, and I loved the ending so much. I thought that Carissa did an amazing job with that, so I'm really hopeful for the second book in the series. Then we had a couple of special edition books that Cassidy chose for me, the first of which is Bloodguard. this is going to throw my white balance all off, so bear with me. Bloodguard by C.C. Robson. This is about a gladiator, and we're following mostly the male's perspective, at least initially, which I thought was really, really cool in a romantasy. In this world, if you fight a certain number of fights, win a certain number of fights, then you can become a Bloodguard, and they are given basically noble status, all of this money, and so he's doing it to save his family. And then we have Maeve, who is actually the princess, but her father was disgraced because he was thought to have killed her grandmother, the queen, and so she is trying to make a political marriage in order to get her kingdom back so that she can get her father out of prison. Things are not going as planned, and so she decides that a Bloodguard is going to be her best bet toward the throne, and so she gets into an arranged marriage with our Bloodguard. I love the arranged marriage trope, especially when they're enemies initially, and I actually was having a lot of fun for the first 40% of this book. And at that point is when things started to go downhill for me. There was a lot less of the gladiator style than I was anticipating. Their chemistry went from fun, flirty banter to I'm in love with you, I would do anything for you. In like a chapter, it just switched way too fast. I felt like the side characters didn't have as much personality and oomph as I needed them to. We were having people die and things happen, and I just didn't care because I didn't know any of these characters. So I was like, well, why should I care? So in the end, it just felt extremely basic and boring in a lot of parts, and I just thought that the execution didn't match up with the idea. And so unfortunately, this did get a 2.5 star from me in the end, which was big sad, but like, it just didn't work for me. Then I read The Half King by Melissa Landers and also didn't enjoy this one. I think, again, the idea of this is so incredibly cool. We have a goddess that basically cursed all of the noble families, and their curse corresponds to how they wronged the goddess. The curse of the king is that he turns into a shadow every night until one day his nights are going to overtake his days and he disappears. There are priests in here that are basically the ones with all of the magic, and they are sworn to the king. They have to do whatever he says, but nobody really knows what happens to the priest when the king disappears if he doesn't have an heir. So we have Cerise, and she is one of the second born daughters, which makes her give her life in servitude to the goddess. She is basically like a priestess, but more of like a nun, a sister of sorts, and she is chosen to become the emissary to the king, and they think that she is going to be the one to be able to break these curses. So the idea is incredibly cool. The execution, not so much. The love interest, love situation, romantasy thing that we got going on in here, I hate to even call it a relationship, went from 0 to 100 way too fast. Cerise is just not got a lot of personality. She's a very meek character, and she's able to do everything. Everything comes really easily to her, so it just made things not very interesting. I think that the thought of religion in here and that conversation could have been done so well, but it didn't really dig deep enough, especially after reading the author's note in here. I was expecting it to dig a lot deeper into that, and it just really didn't. The shadow aspect of the king didn't really play as much of a role in this as I thought it was going to, so unfortunately I just feel like it really missed the mark of potential, and it ended up getting a 2-star from me. Then I read The Academy for Liars, and this is the Illumicrate Evernight edition, and it is stunning. Absolutely stunning. Like, look at these edges. Incredible. 10 out of 10, amazing. So I'm really glad that I enjoyed this book. I am one of the minority, I think, but I don't care. I thought that the magic system in this was really, really cool. We have Lennon, and she is basically just living her life as essentially a housewife when she catches her soon-to-be fiance and her used-to-be best friend together and spirits away. In a parking lot, she gets a phone call with seemingly her own voice that tells her that she has been started into the interview process of Drayton University, and she must come to this perceived location in order to complete her interview. When she gets there, she gets in an elevator that shouldn't exist and goes to a place that actually doesn't exist and has to complete this really weird interview process. I don't want to tell you a whole lot more than that because I think that the magic system in the world and how unique that is really what worked the best for me. Without that, I don't think I would have enjoyed this story because the characters are fine. The relationship is okay. The plot pretty good, but doesn't come in fast enough. So really what carried me in this is that the magic system is very cool. I liked the plot, but because of the way the twist is at the end, it feels like there's not any plot for a large majority of this book. But once we get it and we get everything in the end, I really liked the way that that ended and shaped up. It was action-packed in the ending, but took a while to get there. So I completely understand why people DNF this book early because it's extremely slow. Then I read Rest Stop by Nat Cassidy, which is his newest novella about a guy that is on his way to see his very terrible grandmother that just recently had a stroke, decides that he's going to delay it a little bit longer by stopping at this gas station. When he gets in, there's nobody there, and he goes into the bathroom and he wishes he hadn't. It's not a very long book, so I am going to leave the synopsis at that, but I think if you like slashers, you like a little bit of weird, you like quirky dark humor, then this could work for you. I ended up giving it a 4-star. I think sometimes it went a little bit overboard on the humor, but I also think that it was just Nat Cassidy's way of bringing in that traditional slasher vibe and also not taking itself too seriously. This is not a slasher, I will say that. It just has that feel to me, but it is a very isolated setting. We have a very small cast of characters. He doesn't leave the rest stop, but I found it to be a lot of fun and I enjoyed it. We're almost there, guys. Next up, we have First Lie Wins by Ashley Eston. This was one that I read for the Goodreads Choice Awards. It's about the first lie that you tell needing to be the most important one. We have our main character, and she has put herself in this relationship and gotten herself a very specific boyfriend for a job. And that's really all I want to tell you, because I feel like anything more than that does spoil most of the story. It comes in pretty quick with what exactly is going on, and my favorite part of this book was the beginning when I had no clue what was going on. Once I found out, it suddenly got a lot less interesting. There was a little bit of a twist at the end, but just not enough to carry me through. I felt like it was kind of boring to be a thriller, and I wish that there was more happening overall. So it was fine, but it just wasn't something that I was in love with, and I gave it a 3-star. Then we have Wild Love, which is by far the most surprising book of the month. This was the romance, and I don't typically read contemporary romance. Typically speaking, contemporary romance just doesn't have enough going on for me because our whole plot typically revolves around just 2 characters, and I like fantasy elements and magic and politics and all of these other things to be going on. Oftentimes I find romances, especially after they've gotten together, to be kind of dull, but this, so good. We have Ford, who has made it big on his record company and is a billionaire, but he still kind of lives a normal life. He still lives in his small town. Then we have Rosie, who has tried to make it big and wants to get out of her small town, but when something happens and she's fired from her job, she ends up back at home living in the doghouse of her brother. Ford is her brother's best friend, and she has always just kind of thought, he's my brother's best friend. I don't really want anything to do with him. Ford also has got a 12-year-old that showed up on his doorstep and said, "You remember when you donated sperm at 19? Yeah, here I am and I need your help." So all of those dynamics and the banter between all of the characters, not just our female and male leads, not just Ford and Rosie, but all of them, with the kid who was old enough to have banter and fun with and wasn't like a baby trope, with the brother, with the parents. Like, it was just so much fun. I thought the third act conflict was a really good like character development moment rather than super high drama, and I just thought it was great. I loved it, and I will definitely be reading more from Elsie Silver in the future. And then we have The Spellshop by Sarah Beth Durst. I've actually really enjoyed a book by her before, The Queens of Renynthia, but this was nothing like that. This is very, very cozy about our female main character who is a librarian that doesn't like people, and all she likes is a spider plant named Kaz. When one day the rebellion comes through and burns the library to the ground, so she escapes with some books to an island where she grew up, and once she's there, she realizes, I have to do something to be able to survive, so she opens a jam shop that also has a spell shop in the back. This book, I think, was just trying to do a little bit too much. It was very cozy, which is not my thing. Like, cozy just doesn't typically work for me. And while I can absolutely respect the writing and see why people love it, it was very boring for me overall. I liked Kaz, but that just wasn't enough to carry the whole story. It was supposed to be a romantasy, but the male lead, Lauren, had the personality of a stick, so it didn't really feel like a romantasy. And I felt like the romance was only probably 20% of the plot. In a romantasy, I feel like it should be a whole lot more than that. Then we tried to introduce politics and this rebellion plot, and it just did not work for me at all. So this one unfortunately got a 2-star. It was fine. I can see why people like it, but I would recommend it to people that like reading like Travis Baldree. I think you could really enjoy this book. Almost done. Next we have Sleep Tight by J.H. Marquette, or Markert, I think is how you say that. This starts off talking about the execution of Father Silence, who killed a bunch of boys that were outcast back 20 years ago, and our main character Tess, whose father put him away. She was a little bit involved in it, but you don't really know exactly what her involvement entailed, and so she's trying to deal with this by herself, and she's really distracted. She drops her kid off at school one day, doesn't watch them walk in the building, and realizes that her daughter has been kidnapped, and it has something to do with Father Silence. She doesn't know if it's a copycat or what exactly is going on, but she has to find her daughter. There were aspects to this book that I liked. I think the writing was fine. I think the overall plot and kind of the twists and turns in this were really good. There was a little too much going on in my opinion, but also it was way too long all at the same time. It felt rushed in parts. It just wasn't paced very well. We have this police procedural type thing going on, which is a really slow mystery, and then we got to the end and like everything, all of the twists and turns were jam-packed into the last like 10%, and it didn't work for me. I was bored for too much of it that by the time the ending rolled around, I just didn't care anymore. It kind of used the mental health thing as a plot device too, which is not my favorite, even though I really like the concept of what it did. I find it incredibly fascinating, but it did not do it quite as well as I would have hoped for it to. It got a little convoluted in places. So if you like a police procedural and you want something with a little bit more of a horror element to it, then I would try this, but I don't feel like it was really a horror book. Last but not least, we have Voyage of the Damned, which is a cozy fantasy about this world where you have blessings, and our main character is supposed to have a blessing, but because his father slept around, he is having to lie to everyone and say that he has a blessing when he really doesn't. So he's decided that he is going to sabotage it so that he doesn't actually have to do what he needs to do. This one falls prey to the same thing that the Spellshop did, where it's just a little bit too cozy quirky for me. It's even more quirky than the Spellshop was, which is kind of shocking, but our main character is kind of all over the place, and I think that the bones of a good book are there, but it's just not, it didn't work for me because of that. The writing is good, the writing is fine, but I just was bored with the plot overall. Cozy is just not for me. There you have it. That is all the books that I read in the month of November. We've been here for a very long time. Sorry about that. I hope you grabbed your popcorn before we started. Let me know what your favorite or least favorite book of the month of November was down in the comments below. If you just want to let me know that you were here and hanging out, leave me a snake emoji for Academy for Liars. As always, thank you guys so very much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!